welcome to our live stream. I'm here today with art prof teaching artist Lauryn Welch, and today we are critiquing your artwork. We have two pieces we're going to be looking at today, this mixed media installation by Mika Obayashi, and also this oil and acrylic painting by Johnmurf de Vera. If you would like to grow as an artist and you can't afford an art class, we've got everything you need here at Art Prof, critiques and tutorials. And I'm very excited that both Johnmurf and Mika are live with us in the chat right now. So say hello to them if you guys are watching. And Johnmurf and Mika, we would love to hear from you. These critiques are so much fun when the artist is here with us live and we can really have a more interactive conversation. Okay, so let's start out with Mika's piece. It's called As the Crow Flies, and it's created from handmade washi, wool yarn, feathers, and styrofoam. And I think you guys can see that it's a very large piece. It's 108 inches tall. And let me just give you guys a little bit of information about Mika and their work. Mika explains in the statement, it's made from over 1,000 individual threads that pierce several large sheets of handmade washing paper. Threads are secured tightly so they remain parallel. And then Mika ripped and arranged the paper so it created dynamic gesture. And in the middle of the installation, Mika explains it's a dense ball of feathers. And she's always had an aesthetic interest in birds. When she moved to Japan for the year, she was quick to notice the absurd amount of crows that live in the sea. And she enjoyed working with feathers of the materials that have the ability to suggest liveliness. And this is all in the video description below. So if you guys want to check out Mika's statement or her Instagram, it's all there. And lastly, she says she wants to reveal her desire for balance, ephemerality, and beauty, and that this piece is probably going to be part of her portfolio submission for graduate programs. Lauryn, what is your first impression of Mika's piece?
It's a stunner. 10 out of 10. It's amazing. This is the kind of piece that is really, really beautiful. It's the kind of piece you'll walk into a museum and you'll see, and you just want to look at it for a really long time because there's so much craftsmanship. It's really about beauty. It's a piece for people who like beauty. That being said, I think that there are some things content-wise that I have trouble connecting with. But when I see these detail shots here, I just think about how the artist had to connect each one of those threads up and down, and how they are all perfectly taut and going through that paper there. And it's just a beautiful image of synchronicity that I love that.
The craftsmanship is impeccable. And Mika, you're making it look really easy, and I suspect this was torturously difficult to pull off. And Mika, maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into that. But if you guys look at this piece, the fact that every single one of these strings is parallel and they're perfectly lined up, this is not something that you just come up with and make. This takes serious planning and craftsmanship to pull off. And I really want to emphasize that, because as much as I think content is important, so is execution. I mean, if you have a great idea, it doesn't matter if you can't pull it off in terms of making something. And Lauryn, this is not your average project. This is very ambitious.
I kind of wish that Mika had included the thumbnail sketches for this, the planning stages, just so we could give an example of what the planning looks like for something like this. As you said, like, you can't just come up with this. It takes a lot of both technical things figuring out, like how to make this work with gravity, and also material things like this handmade washi paper. And also these content things, where are these coming from? How did you get to this particular sculptural image? All of this is very complex.
Right. And I think one thing that strikes me about the visual is this amazing contrast between the perfection of the threads and how taut they are, but then how imperfect and gestural and dynamic these pieces of washi paper are. And I think that contrast is beautifully done. Now, Lauryn, what do you think about the color of the thread? Because I think with sculpture, you either have two choices. You can either paint the object that you're making, or you can just pick the color of a material that already exists. So what do you think about this choice, the white washi paper with the red thread?
I think there's something really interesting happening here with an optical mixing going on. Having so many red threads together vibrating against both the light in the building and the whiteness of the paper creates this vibration, this effect of almost seeing red. It feels as if these threads are moving in and out within each other. I get this sense of, I know I'm biased by reading this title As the Crow Flies and reading the statement, so I'm thinking of birds, but I think of how all the thousand threads are together and how that echoes a kind of murmuration, or the way birds can be such small little objects themselves but create a much larger vibrational creature in the air. So I think the choice of the red is very good in that it is easy to see. It would be different if light blue or pink or something else was used. I think that the color is very strong and that is a good thing. I don't know what the red itself has to do with, say, the crows, though.
Quick question. Well, not question, actually. Can you actually describe what a murmuration is? Because I'm not sure everybody here knows.
Sorry, yes, I can. So in certain types of birds, certain species of birds, starlings, for instance, they will fly around in these giant flocks that kind of breathe in and out in the sky. It looks like breathing almost, really, is what I think of. Or an effect, a screensaver effect on a computer that goes like in and out like a wave. These birds are flying amongst each other and just making these crazy massive shapes in the sky. And that's as best as I can describe a murmuration.
We have a comment from Mika who explains it took months to plan. I really had no idea what it would look like in the end. Really? Because it looks like it was very well thought through. And I'm amazed that there was this spontaneous feel to it. But I think that's incredible that despite a piece requiring so much planning, you could still have some parts of it that remain spontaneous. So I'm very, very impressed with that, Mika. And Mika, can you tell us in the chat a little bit more about what you said about the crows that are living in Japan? Because you do mention about the absurd amount of crows that are living in the city, but I guess I want to hear more specifically why you think that matters, why that jumped out to you. Because the thing about this piece that's kind of killing me right now, Lauryn, it's beautiful. It's stunning. I mean, everybody here is just gushing in the chat right now about how amazing the piece is. But when I read the artist statement, it's a little bit loose and fragmented. I mean, I understand the crow reference, but how do you get from crow to balance, ephemerality, and beauty? Where's the connection there? And so I'm wondering, Mika, did you do any research on crows and their relationship with that city? Because I think, Lauryn, you know that birds are so specific in terms of being native to a certain environment. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit more?
About the crows or the statement?
Either. Or just birds, because I know you observe birds, like literally you go birding.
Yes.
And you probably look at them really closely.
Yes.
And maybe that could be part of the process for Mika.
Absolutely. I think you're at an interesting crossroads here because, Mika, you are in you have this experience where you went to Japan and that seems very meaningful to you. And then you also have the crow, which can have a meaning unto itself. Crows live across the world and they have this very specific personality. They're super smart. They understand social relationships. They have good memories. They're good problem solvers. So are you trying to gather more of these characteristics from Japan, from the city that you were in, bring up this nostalgia, this emotional feeling being there? Or are you trying to make a comment about the crows and how they live there or their relationships? It's right now, I'm looking at this and not thinking really about either. And I think it's because it's in this in-between stage. I realize that you're using like the washi paper, which is an important material. And I see that you use the crow feathers and that references the crows. But beyond that, for the shapes that they're creating or the way that it's set up and the colors that you're choosing, I can't pinpoint that really to the things that are in your statement. So, and this is especially important for a grad program, is most people are going to say, oh, this is a beautiful piece. Why do you need to have this really rigorous writing behind it that connects with the piece? Like, we can just enjoy it as a technical wonder. But when you're applying to a grad program, they're really looking for that writing that is really airtight, that matches the piece really well.
Right. And I think that when you are capable of making a piece that is this stunning, you can sort of get away with that in some contexts, but in grad school, they're not going to let you do that. They're going to really push you in terms of getting that content to be more substantial. Because my feeling about this piece is that the execution and the making of it is so incredible. But when I look at what it's inspired by, and I try to make that connection between that and the visual, it's hard for me. Because the thing is, you say that there's this ball of feathers in the middle, but for me, the piece is much more about the washi paper. And I'm not sure what the washi paper is supposed to be because it seems like a completely different entity than the ball of feathers. Like, I don't see any relationship. They really feel like they're just next to each other and that's it. Whereas the washi paper and the red yarn to me are beautifully integrated. So it's strange because it's like your major source of inspiration, which is the crows, is actually for me sort of the least interesting part of the piece, and it's the most removed and detached from everything else. What do you think about the ball of feathers, Lauryn?
I think it's kind of funny because crows are very active and adventurous creatures, and they're all over the place. They're tearing up pieces of paper and putting it in someone's yard and bothering the other little birds in the in the trees there. And so here, though, you have a ball of feathers, crow feathers, that is very static. They're not doing crow-like things. So it's not necessary for it to exactly echo crows. But basically what this is saying to me is, and it looks like what Mika is saying in the chat, is that it's actually not really even about the crows so much. It's more about the aesthetic. It's about beauty. So this conversation we're having is really giving me some clues as to what you're actually interested in, which seems to be aesthetics. And that is a real thing that you can talk about in your work. It's just a different point of research.
We have a comment from Hamza who says, it's super cool. Like how there seems to be movement from the tissues, the washi paper, which definitely helps in emphasizing a sense of flight and movement. Yes, I mean, craftsmanship-wise, it's absolutely stunning. And we do have some commentary, I believe, from Mika, which I'm scrolling up to find. Mika saying, I was doing research into crows, but to be honest, I don't think it's essential to the piece in the end. That was where I struggled the most, to connect some kind of meaning to the piece. And then a second comment from Mika says, I was inspired by crows, the movement of crows, but I'm more aesthetically driven than anything else. Okay, so that makes sense that maybe the crows were the launching pad. They are the first point of inspiration for you, which is fine. And if you end up somewhere completely different, that's okay too. But the thing is, if you just say I'm interested in beauty, okay, but beauty is not a new concept. It's one that a lot of people have been working with for centuries. And
I disagree.
Okay, let me finish
Clara.
first.
Okay.
I'm just not convinced that saying I'm interested in beauty is enough, because I just worry about the piece falling into the category of just spectacle and eye candy. And maybe for some people that's enough, but I don't think so from my point of view. Lauryn.
Beauty is very unfashionable right now in the art world as a whole. I'm just saying, and that's why you're getting a comment from Clara that is questioning whether beauty is enough, because beauty is a lot of baggage, kind of like how painting and sculpture have a lot of baggage. They've been done over and over for thousands of years, and they've been the top of the food chain for thousands of years. So everybody wants to take beauty down and say, hey, beauty's already been done. It's insubstantial. There's nothing left to say. And I think that's precisely why it is a really interesting thing to get into right now. But it's really challenging because you have to take beauty and the things about beauty, the things that make you go, oh, I love this. Oh, this makes me feel a real emotion. And you have to question all of those. You have to take these things that you're so good at that you can really seduce people with, and you have to bring us to a new place with that. And I think that's perfectly okay. I think that's a really exciting concept, but it is immensely challenging to do that because there is so much available out there within the realm of beauty.
But Lauryn, you have to think about this. You're contextualizing that argument within the context of, oh, what is trendy in the art world right now? And I'm a believer that you can't be dictated by trends. And so you could say, oh, well, beauty is out right now. Well, in 10 years, it'll be in. And so I just don't know that that's valid as far as saying, well, nobody's doing it right now, so therefore it has weight to it. I just think that the whole beauty concept is just awfully generic. I mean, is it basically saying it's so beautiful, I'm so overwhelmed that you don't have to have any larger concept going on?
That's what I'm saying, though, is I'm saying that you are actually the one that's being dictated by the trends right now by also poo-pooing beauty. I think that because people have been doing stuff with beauty, just like people have been doing stuff with, say, religion or figurative painting or still lives for like forever, doesn't mean that there isn't still more stuff to say, or doesn't mean that those things aren't important or blasé or any of that stuff. It just becomes a real challenge to take that to a new place, or a provocative place, a place that makes people stay more than 10 seconds and come out of the museum and have them still think about that particular piece. So what I'm saying is it's okay to be in this realm of beauty and to be thinking about beauty and how that's important to you, but you have to figure out why that is important to you and how you can make that important to other people beyond being just the spectacle.
Okay, well, I want to show a couple of artists that I think are somewhat related to what Mika's been creating. So this is a contemporary Japanese artist, Chihara Shioda, and I think very clear relationship here in terms of just the use of the yarn. I mean, that's technically what Chihara Shioda uses. But take a look at her work, Mika, and then another artist who I think would be good to look at. And by the way, for MFA people, if you're interested in applying, I would definitely watch this interview I did with Layla Faye, who is currently in the Yale MFA program, if you guys want to get a little bit of insight into that. And we also have a couple of Q&As on MFA portfolios. But I think looking at somebody like Cornelia Parker, She has this piece at the ICA in Boston, and also Damien Ortega, I think, would also be wonderful to look at. And I think one thing to consider when you look at Damien Ortega and you look at also Cornelia Parker, the objects in themselves have a certain identity. Like these are, I can't remember exactly, but they're actual burned wood from something that I think did burn down. I could be wrong. But Damien Ortega, I think, very clear. You see an axe, you see all these different tools. So those are some things I would think about. So we could talk about beauty for another 18 hours, but I think the point, Mika, is that you're going to have to be prepared, I think, if you end up going into an MFA, to really be able to put your foot down about what it is you want to do. Because I think it's clear from our discussion that Lauryn and I are not really getting a very cohesive statement from the piece. And I think that's probably something you want to work on. What do you think, Lauryn?
Yes, I think the biggest thing here really is about that statement and visual connection. And I do want to clarify, based on what I'm seeing in the chat here, that the way we are talking about this work is very much related to its context. Mika has specified that they are applying to an MFA program, and this piece is shown in a museum type setting, which has certain expectations for the work. Beauty itself and things that are beautiful, generally that is enough. In lots of parts of the art world, we put beautiful work on our walls because it makes us feel really good. That is uncontested. That is totally fine. And if this piece was in that kind of situation, we wouldn't be having this conversation if this was supposed to be a piece that hangs on, like goes in your house, or is something that you made as some kind of personal project. This is very much related to how people see things, both in museums and in MFA programs, which is very theory heavy.
Yeah, so I think what we're saying is that the context that is intended for the artwork really matters, and that we do critique pieces differently based on who the person is, what their goal is, what context they see the work in. And so that's an important thing to consider. Okay, so anyway, let's take a look at our next artist. And actually, before we do that, let me just let you guys know, if you are interested in being featured here on YouTube, having us critique your artwork, you want to go to artprof.org and you want to click on Art Critiques. You can see that there is a green button. And if you click on that green button, you will find that it takes you to the submission form. You guys can enter your work and we'll consider it for a YouTube critique. Okay. The next artist we're going to talk about is Johnmurf de Vera. So let me tell you guys a little bit about Johnmurf. They're saying that they consider themselves an intermediate artist. I'm a learning artist considering going into business. The piece is about penance, and Johnmurf explains, I struggled accepting myself being gay my whole life. I was raised a Christian. I felt pressured to please the people around me to the point that I left my church. But after doing so, I had a Jesus experience that changed the course of my life. I felt the love of God. I want to love him back for what he has done with me. It's given me hope for brighter days. So this is a self-portrait. Johnmurf says, because I am a sinner who would like to be as humble as the Virgin Mary. Painted my heart based on what I learned from God, where he resides in the human heart. So the theme Johnmurf wants to communicate, especially towards gays, is only love, to not be fooled by the people who tell you that God hates you. You're not an abomination. He considers everyone to be precious in his eyes. You merely need to love him back with your heart. He's there in your heart, listening while you pray. Lauryn, some first reactions.
Wow, that's such a journey. I think that there is a lot going on here, both in the statement and the image. You can read some of these things. It's interesting that we have these two pieces back to back, because it's really the statement image thing that we're talking about a lot. So here you've got a lot of interest going on. You've got the self-portrait of yourself. You've got the, obviously, self-portrait. You've got the heart with the cross, and you've got the Virgin Mary in the background, and it's highly colorful. There's a lot of pattern, there's a lot of symbolism going on. At the same time, it is being held back a little bit by some technical issues. My biggest one, I think, is the composition that is supporting the symbolism here.
What is it about the composition that you think could be improved?
I think you have a lot of really, I'm going to call them really bling-like things. That's probably a bad word to use for religious icons, but things that are very potent, both in symbol and in color, and they're kind of fighting against each other. For instance, the figure of yourself is using a lot of the same colors, especially in the skin, as the figure in the background. And so you yourself are not really standing out against this figure, and there's no hierarchy going on with that. It's like a little awkward having them back to back like that. And also there's some areas that I have questions about, like that chunk out of the corner in the upper right. It's distracting, and I'm not sure why that is there. And these are things that it's a very ambitious piece, and there are a lot of really good things going on. They're just fighting against each other, and this would be something that would be solved with doing extensive thumbnailing for a while.
And Johnmurf, maybe tell us in the chat, what type of preparatory work did you do for this painting? It's a very big painting. You guys can see it's 50 inches by 50 inches. And so I'm wondering, Johnmurf, if you did any thumbnail sketches, if you did other versions of it, how long you spent really with the subject. I mean, of course, you spent your whole life with it, basically, but how long you really spent planning this out. We have a comment from Danya who says, beautiful. I'm sorry for your struggle. This is a wonderful way to express yourself. And Slapnir is saying it has a feeling of an icon painting. And Neil is saying this painting conflicts so much with my experience, so I don't know how to respond to it without bias. Well, Neil, I think that whatever your response is, it's valid. I mean, nobody looks at art without some degree of bias. You can't help it because that's who you are. So I'd be interested to hear if you are comfortable expressing that. And BBF has a question for Johnmurf. They're saying, do you think that people who are not religious can connect with your art? That's a great question, because you have to think about who's your audience. Who are you trying to reach? And that's pretty important, because you might have somebody who's not gay and not religious. How are you going to make them care and empathize with your story? And that's hard when you deal with personal narratives, to get people to care about your life story and why it might matter to them as a person. Now, Lauryn, for me, my first thought, first of all, Johnmurf, good for you. This is so much in this piece. I mean, Lauryn, I find it very moving when people can really bare their souls like this, don't you think? It's a big leap.
Yeah, it's huge. And it's also, I want to say, very challenging to do in a single painting. I feel like you almost need a series about this kind of work, because your story is it sounds like a very long and arduous story that you went through. So I feel like that could be conveyed in more than one image.
I mean, Johnmurf, in my opinion, the amount of content that's packed into this image, it's enough for a lifetime. You could only do this theme for the rest of your life and you would never run out of content. That's how much is here. And so I would really encourage you to think about making this into a series. I don't know if that was your plan to begin with, but you definitely have the content that would be great for a series. And we do have a video about how to create a series, so you might check that out on our YouTube channel. Johnmurf is saying, I suppose you're right. That's the Holy Spirit. I just did it about 3 days. Okay, so it's a pretty fast piece considering how large it is. But I guess, Johnmurf, my first impression is that the Virgin Mary is so gigantic compared to the self-portrait that she really takes over the concept in a way that I don't think she should. Because really, this is about you, okay? The Virgin Mary is part of this story, obviously, but I just feel like I see the Virgin Mary before I see the self-portrait. And I'd rather it be the reverse. I would rather the Virgin Mary be a supplemental image to the self-portrait, because there's so much symbolism in the chest area, because you have the cross, you have the anatomical heart. And those are two images that I did not see right away. It really took me a while. But those are way more important than the hands of the Virgin Mary in terms of content. Don't you think, Lauryn?
Yeah, I definitely agree. You put that much more succinctly than I did. There is a size hierarchy thing going on right now. I also want to put in there before I forget that this critique reminds me a little bit of the other one that we did about male sexuality that included a lot of the religious icons in there. So that would be a good foil for this piece, and creating that kind of content that can lead you around the whole piece and talk about your personal experience.
Right. And actually, we do have, if I go through our slideshow, a couple of artists who I think are somewhat related in terms of subject matter. For example, I think Robert Mapplethorpe would be a really good person for you to look at. Robert Mapplethorpe's a photographer, and so it's a completely different material. But he was an artist in the 70s who really spearheaded kink culture in New York City. And so a lot of his work does have gay themes in it. And it would be interesting to see, okay, how do people really show that in the context of fine art? Because I guess my other concern, Lauryn, is that if I didn't have the description of the artwork being about somebody struggling with accepting themselves for being gay, I don't know that I would know this is about being gay. I don't know. Did you see that in the piece, or is this just me?
I think that it can be a little difficult, and we have talked about this in some critiques. How do you talk about sexuality or signify sexuality in a piece? What are those symbols that both people inside the circle can read and outside of the circle can read? I think that Mapplethorpe is a great person to look at because he uses a lot of those signifiers. And so even though the work is not necessarily religious, it seems like you've got some of the religious signifiers right there. But the signifiers about being gay or being queer are something that still needs to be developed a little bit, both in standing of the circle of people that you live with, your community, but then also what personal symbols those are for you. What are your personal narrative signifiers?
We have a question from Neil. How do you appreciate art that goes against your beliefs? My journey is pretty much the opposite. I found self-acceptance by rejecting religion. That's why I'm uncomfortable. That's a wonderful question. And I'll tell you, Neil, I think the artworks that for me have the greatest impact are the ones that are not aligned with our personal beliefs or experience, but get us to really see another point of view. Because I've definitely been to shows where the artwork had subject matter that I just fundamentally did not agree with. But for some reason or another, that artwork had an impact on me. Have you ever had that experience, Lauryn?
Yeah, we have this saying in critique that it's better to cause an intense reaction with someone than to get crickets, to get no reaction. And then the other side of that is that if you really hate a piece that you see in a show or a gallery or online, chances are you should lean into that and explore that more, because hate is a really close emotion to love in that it is a passion, it's a connection to an object or to a subject. So I think that is where you can find meaning in looking at work that you may not agree with, is using that as a lens to explore your own feelings and to create a certain amount of empathy for the artist or for the piece as well.
And Johnmurf is saying, I had a dream she gave me a rose. Oh, well, that changes everything, don't you think? Because Johnmurf, my feeling about the technical handling of the two figures is that I think it's awkward in terms of size, because she's just like a little bit bigger than you, but not by a lot. And she's not tiny either. And so that almost makes it more awkward, because you either want the two figures to be exactly proportional to each other or so different in scale that it seems very deliberate. This just feels very awkward to me right now. And also right now, the two figures, they don't interact at all. I mean, it's almost like they don't even acknowledge each other. And the way that the portrait has been painted, it almost feels like somebody painted the portrait, cut it out, and then collaged it on top of the Virgin Mary. And so I just would like to see a more compelling interaction between the two figures. What do you think, Lauryn?
Yeah, definitely. This is again where those thumbnailing composition things would come in handy. I would really look at some illuminations from religious scripts, because there are a lot of scenes that show different saints interacting with people, or these Virgin Mary paintings, and they all have these, the way that the piece is constructed is kind of, it seems like what you're going for, where there are heavenly figures or bodies that are coming down that like influence the scene or influence the humans. But in these manuscripts, they're done in a way that is really balanced, and everything has a particular place that it's in, and that means something. So it would also be good to maybe look at some of the backgrounds of how those images are created, or why people are placed where they are within the image.
Well, I think if we look at this Giotto image, if you look at the scale relationships, the Virgin Mary is clearly way bigger than everybody else, because you have these adults on the left and the right-hand side, but size-wise, they look puny compared to her. And so I think that what you might try pushing, Johnmurf, is creating a piece so that it's more deliberately surreal. Like, are you trying to actually put it in the real world? If it is a dream, do you want to be more clear that it actually is a dream? Because right now, I just feel like a lot of the decisions, they feel accidental to me. They don't look like you had a really clearly defined intent behind it. One thing I do want to bring up, actually, is the shorts. I think that's a really interesting part of this piece. What do you think about that clothing choice, Lauryn?
I find the shorts kind of sexy. Is that a weird thing for me to say? They're kind of provocative, and it's interesting having that in a religious icon kind of piece. There is some stuff that I have read about how Jesus is crucified on the cross, and how some of those images also have these undertones, that these very limited undertones about sexuality, that I think kind of comes back to this here a little bit, in like the ways that you're choosing to cover yourself or expose yourself. Those are the connections that I'm making.
Well, Lauryn, one of the reasons the shorts really pop out to me, they're the only indication of contemporary life. Because the Virgin Mary image, that looks like an old image. And then the top of the figure doesn't have any clothing on, so there's no indication of that. And so, Johnmurf, I sort of wish that there was more of that personality and also time period, so we could understand that this is not an old painting that was done by Giotto, but that this is happening today. And so I would really pump that up a little bit more and show us that time period. And maybe that's something in the background, because I don't know that I like the background very much. It looks awkward and it's not particularly well painted. So you might think about that. But another thing is this comment from Hamza. I think it's really symbolism heavy, so much so that you might be able to lose some of it and still be fine. Like, you could crop out yourself out of the Virgin Mary. And when you do that, it would be better to emphasize yourself in a personal emotion and feeling. I think that's a great comment, Hamza, because in your statement, Johnmurf, you talk a lot about the heart. You say, you're not an abomination. God considers everyone to be precious in his eyes. You merely need to love him back with your heart. He is there in your heart, listening when you pray. But the thing is, the representation of the heart, it's an anatomical heart. It's not a symbolic heart. And so I'm not totally convinced that that symbolism is working just yet. What do you think, Lauryn?
Well, you went into this little thumbnail here, and I didn't realize that Jesus was on the cross and that. I saw the cross, but I thought it was just this gold shine. So now I'm really invested in that part right now. Honestly, I think the heart, is not really necessary, especially considering in the way that the heart is used and talked about in religion and Christianity is, I mean, I know it's not about an atomical heart, but I cannot put those words together. But it is something that's very broad. It's not even related to like the sign of a heart. It's something that has to do with this really deep spirituality, this really vast kind of sense of self. I feel like it has a lot to do with sense of self. And so when you're using things like an anatomical heart, it pulls us very far away from that original meaning. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth as far as what a heart means, but I just think that those things are actually rather far apart.
Yeah, I just think that I've seen too many bleeding hearts. You've just seen them in really tacky, cliche situations. It's just a really hard image to reinvent for a lot of people. And I just think that it's skimming the surface of what you talk about. Like your statement, Johnmurf, is so emotional and it's extremely captivating and compelling. But when I look at the painting, I feel that there's a stiffness to the way that the image looks. And especially when I look at the face, I mean, the face really feels frozen in a way. And so I guess what I'm looking for is just a much more emotional experience, because I feel like what you're doing more is you're putting together symbols that do represent the experience, but we're missing the emotion. Like I really want to feel the way I felt when I read your statement. And I think that could be really good. Now, from a technical point of view, I think it would really help you to do some study of anatomy, because some of your muscles, biceps, clavicle, they're a little wonky. And it does seem like the way you're painting that you do want them to be fairly anatomically correct. And so I would recommend our Anatomy for Artists series, where I go through a lot of the anatomical structures and facial structures as well. So portrait drawing mistakes, I would watch this video, because you have so much to say, Johnmurf, but you need the skills, I think the hard skills, to really get that going. What do you think, Lauryn?
Yeah, I think those are all great suggestions. I would definitely brush up on anatomy. It's agonizing because you actually do a fairly good job at a lot of the muscles and stuff going on. It's like getting that last 10% or so it feels very natural, and that naturalness comes with a lot of practice. Another thing I do want to say is that you could also practice with trying out different skin tones. It looks like you're using a lot of white in both the picture of Mary and yourself, a lot of titanium white, and that's going to really kill your color and also add to that stiffness. I think your tones are really good, especially in the face. It's just making sure that your hues match up with that.
I would also add, you probably want to study foreshortening a little bit more, because you actually have a lot of foreshortening in both of the arms. Like Lauryn, you see that section where he's holding the rose and the gesture of the hand is super foreshortened. Same thing is happening on the arm on the right hand side. I mean, foreshortening is really, really hard to do because it just looks weird no matter what you do. And so you sort of have to embrace how weird it's going to look. And then sometimes that's really the solution. It's sort of hard to describe, but I think I would definitely work on your hard skills, because clearly the figure is important to you. I don't think you should go 100% symbolism. Do you think, Lauryn? I don't know. That's my
yeah. It seems like you're in love with figuration, and I would say push that. That's great. That can, using your figures can help you push some of that symbolism that you want. So yeah, practice your skills.
Lauryn and I are going to be in the Discord in about 5 minutes or so. We're going to be in the post live streams channel. So join us for the after party, because that's what all the cool kids are doing. And if you're not in the Discord, the invite link is in the video description. And subscribe to our channel and join the Art Prof family. And thank you so much to our top Patreon supporters who make everything possible. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughtful comments in the chat. I think it's so great when people get their work critiqued here. It's not just from Art Prof staff, it's also from the whole community. And that's really, really wonderful. Thank you to Johnmurf and Mika for sharing your artwork with us. Everybody stay safe. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.